Hey everyone, welcome to The More You Know, The Better It Tastes, our amazing podcast with San Antonio restaurants and the flavors of Texas.
Super amazing podcast.
Super amazing.
We need to start saying that. It is our super amazing podcast.
That's right. I 100% agree.
I want a t-shirt.
Exactly. I'm Susie Lafredo and I'm here with my business partner.
I'm Alan Williams and we are glad to be here today.
We are. And we have an amazing guest. We're so excited.
Thank you.
As always, I mean, this is one of the things that I love about this podcast is we have the opportunity to sit down and, I don't know, get to know some
of the coolest people on earth.
Exactly. Some of the cool, really influential people here in our city.
Your head's getting bigger.
Yeah.
We have Chris Flores here, who you might know him as eatmigos. So, Chris, welcome.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course.
Super glad to have you.
I love the podcast, especially the more you know, the better it tastes. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Like that tag, I think that translates over to everything, right? You're so much more invested when you know the person who's touching the food,
absolutely,
who's pushing the food out, and where they came from.
That's exactly
it's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, we had the idea, but Susie's husband Jim is the one that came up with that tagline. So that's exactly what we want to do: is get behind that story and know something about it. So when you go there, you're invested in that restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Creates that connection.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Yeah. Well, so glad you're here today. So Chris runs eatmigos. He does a lot of different things. So we'll talk about all the things that he does. So eatmigos, what does that mean?
All right. So whenever I started the blog, right? So it started off as a vlog on YouTube.
Okay.
And I had a friend that I would work with in production a lot, and he was from the Valley, right? So he's from the RGV, and they are Spanglish to the max, you know? You know, so like, you know, he would say things like, ya fuimos a Walmart y compré, you know, todo la agua, and, you know, the chips, and I mean, it was just like Tex-Mex Spanglish, and it was just like... So one day I was like, hey, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to video us guys because whenever we go eat, I feel like conversations are fun and like, you know, we're laughing and all that stuff. So I pull out the camera and I turn it on and nothing, everyone's quiet. Everyone's like, everyone's so reserved and nothing happens, right? And I was like, come on, guys. I was like, man, you're my amigo. You're my amigos, man. I was like, come on, let's hype it up. He's like, yeah, but we're eating. I'm like, yeah, bro, you're the eatmigos.
Eatmigos.
Right.
And then we kind of all looked. I was like, man, that's a cool name.
Yeah.
So my buddy Carlos to this day, he'll be like, hey, man, I came up with a name. I'm like, well, I was like inspiration, very heavily inspiration because it was kind of like, it was funny to me, you know? It was like, you know, an English word with a Mexican Spanish word. And so that's kind of where.
You need to do secret videoing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So you can find eatmigos on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook. You do eatmigos is all over the place, talking about where you should go eat. Great restaurants, right?
So have you always been into restaurants?
I haven't. Ironically, I was a creature of habit. If I hadn't been there, I wouldn't go. Right. And I think that's one of the things that eatmigos helps me. One of the problems that helps me solve for others. Right. When I walk into a restaurant, I mean, now it's different because obviously I do this way more often and I'm way more confident in myself. But before, when I'd walk in, if I didn't know the flow, I mean, I may leave. I'd be like, man, I don't. Where do you pay? Like, where do you order?
Right.
Are they going to seat me? Like, no, this is just too overwhelming. I'm leaving. Right. So I think I would say, subconsciously, I try to solve that problem for everyone now. So when you go in, you feel like you've been there, you feel like you know the food, you know the flow of the menu, and it just makes it so much easier. And, you know, my recommendations are whatever I generally show because, you know, I'll show dishes, but I've tried other dishes, but these are the ones that I feel like what represents the restaurant. Right, the best representation for the restaurant, or what I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, and I think that's so cool too. And I don't know, there had to have been a time, of course, when you were doing this that you suddenly realized, wow, I'm actually making a difference for these restaurants.
Yeah,
you know, so the first time that happened was with the place on Alamo Ranch, and I remember him calling me. So let me say this: whenever I started in 2017, and back then, no one was really doing video. And I always tell people, if I came out today, brand new, eatmigos started today, you know, October 16th, I was like, I would not have the traction or anything I did. The only thing that separated me from every other food blogger and every other blogger was I knew how to do video. So I kind of started my own little skits. Really, the only people who were doing video was Marvin from Neighborhood Eats and David Elder. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do this myself. Like I produce stuff for TV all the time. I was producing my own, right? So I did that. And I feel that's what separated me. Now, I say that to say this. When I first started, people weren't used, this is pre-COVID, and people weren't used to seeing people talk to a camera or a phone or video, and people thought you were like behind the kitchen doors and like you were going to talk trash.
Oh, wow.
So I would get shut down. I'd be filmed. I'd get shut down because I wouldn't tell them I would literally just show up and pull up a camera. And it was, I think it was very intrusive, and I would be there talking and people would be like, hey, you can't film here.
Oh,
I was
wow.
like, and I remember, I remember the donut shop. I remember I was like devastated. It was like, man, the food here's amazing. I want to show it.
I want to show it. Yeah.
And they shut me down.
Wow.
And but so it was hard to get started. But then I think people got more used to it when COVID happened. People got more used to doing FaceTime and people talking on their phone and cameras. And I really think that during that time, when it comes to like doing what we do, content creation, it really blew us all up because people were looking for us to tell them like what's open, what's available, what's going on. And it really propelled us.
Yeah. So you have a media background.
I do. I've done production all over the world. Yeah. I've been doing that for a long time. That's my trade. So
did you go to school for that?
I didn't. That's the funny thing. Whenever you first start, you like start as a grip or a PA, production assistant, just like pulling wire or whatever, and then you kind of graduate. It's like you said in Coming to America. One day I'll be on fries. And it's like, and then they're like, oh, you can handle the sticks, the camera on sticks, and then before I knew it, I was a director, and then I was producing, and then it was like I was producing for like TV, like for actual TV, and I was like, man, this is crazy. I'm actually doing TV stuff.
Yeah.
And then it happens so fast, right? But my wife always tells me, is like, yeah, you went to YouTube University, because I didn't know how to do it. I'd just go to YouTube and I'd be like, how do you film this, or how do you do this, or whatever. And that's kind of how I learned. I didn't know anything about a camera, I learned how to do everything literally trial by error. And way more error than wins, especially in the beginning.
Yeah. Sometimes that's
really good.
Sometimes that having that, I don't know, hands-on experience. A lot of people learn more having that experience.
I completely agree.
Yeah. So I know at one point you were living in Washington doing producing television, right?
Well, I worked in Washington. So it's whenever I tell people like, oh, I worked there, people are like, so you live there? So I've worked in DC. I've worked on 5 continents, right? And I've worked in almost every state. I think except for like maybe like 10 states or something or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah. So what I would do is like doing what I do. You go there and you film, and you're there for however long it's going to take to get whatever you're filming. Like for instance, I was in Cuba not this past March, the March before, for 2 weeks, I believe, 2.5 weeks or something. And I was filming for a South African school out there that they had. It was 10th anniversary, and that's the last abroad job that I've taken. But
wow, do people constantly tell you, I want your life?
No. It's funny. I feel so blessed to have had the experiences and gone to all the places. But like, it's really hard to get me to travel now because people will be like, "Hey, man, can you go film?" And I'm like, "I can't do that anymore, man. I just don't. I'm so traveled out when it comes to that. I love being at home, and it's like unless I can bring my family, like I really don't. I don't want to go because I want them to experience, right? Because I've been to 53 countries. Yeah, and the majority of those I worked in.
Well, how did it happen? Was it COVID? How did it happen where you kind of got away from doing that and you're staying in San Antonio so much?
So what happened is when COVID started, the world shut down, obviously, right? And I'm sitting there like, what are we going to do? And I got asked to live stream, and I knew how to live stream, but I wouldn't.
Because this is brand new, right? It was really new technology to do that.
And so it was a very big company that asked me to live stream, and I was like, I don't want to fumble the ball. So I had a buddy who knew everything about live streaming. So there's 5 of us, and we worked our butts off, man. We were streaming to TV. We were streaming to networks, all kinds from people's houses. And then the American Cancer Association calls me up, and they're like, hey, we need to get some video of the doctors talking to you so we can send to our patients because, one, they're cancer patients. We can't see them in person. But a lot of them are having the same procedures, the same problems. So we just want to be able to like, if you're having these side effects, here's a video that's going to explain to you what you should do or whatever, right? And I did that. And that's kind of what I would say like fueled the fire. People were like, oh, you're doing video? Well, let's do this, right? And, I guess one of the cool things is I remember getting called from, because I'd been doing food videos for a couple of years or whatever. And I remember SA Living, where y'all are on, Shelly's like, hey, I want to air your segments. And because the only reason I was still doing segments was I got a call, and I'll tell you who it is. I get a call from this group of people, and they're like, hey, we've all lost our jobs, and we're going to cook, and we're going to make meals and deliver them. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And they're like, can we bring you one? Would you do a video? And I'm like, you can bring it to my house? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? You're going to bring me food, right?
Yeah.
So they pull up, they get out, they're super happy. I meet them or whatever. They later on went to be tu asador.
Wow, yeah.
So they called me up. And you ask them, they'll be
We
like,
have
man,
a-
you started this out.
It's so interesting. We have such an amazing Tuasador story as well. So yeah, they're so cool.
Yeah,
But
great people.
So like I helped that, so I think that was really cool. And then as things started slowly opening up, I was going and doing videos, and then Shelly was showing my videos on from S11 was showing my videos on broadcasts and stuff. It was really cool. I mean, it was an amazing experience. But I think that caused everyone to learn how to produce videos more so than anything. Because everybody was FaceTiming or what's it called, Zooming or whatever, right? Google Meeting. And because of that, people learned how to light themselves. People learned how to actually do good video, right? And then I believe that's pretty much when TikTok exploded, right? And then from there on, everybody knew how to do video. And like I said earlier, I feel that with the way it is now, there would be no difference from what I do to anybody else. The only reason that I set myself apart at the beginning was because I knew how to do video.
Yeah. Well, you're good, though. You're good, but I understand what you're saying. It would be harder
much harder
to be different. Yeah.
To jump into the game now.
Well, at some point, you became the official chief taco officer of a. And when I tell people that, they're like, "Man, that is the coolest thing. I want that on my resume."
Well,
so, what does that mean? What does that mean to be the chief taco officer?
Well, I was going to say, and before you mention that, it's not that it just happened.
No.
I mean, you went for it. I mean, you had to create something amazing and send that in and compete. And
I did.
Yeah.
So, whenever I first started, my whole hook, I would say, was I said, I had been doing press releases and working on press releases for big companies for forever. And I was like, well, I can do this for myself, right? I can do my own press release. So I remember I was like, I need a hook. And I remember I did a press release and it failed, right? And I was like, how am I going to separate myself from everyone else? So my hook was, I'm going to eat a taco from every restaurant in San Antonio that sells tacos.
Nice.
And I put it out there into the media universe. And nobody bit. And I went big. I mean, I sent it to CNN. I mean, I sent it to everyone you can imagine.
And if you're doing every taco in San Antonio, that's a lifetime.
That is a lot.
That's a lifetime.
I was
It's a
going to say.
lifetime. It is. It is.
True.
So I remember I got one bite. And I will always say that Maddie Sky, she works for Axos now. She was working for MySA at the time. She sends me a message on, maybe it was Twitter. She's like, hey, I'd like to do a story on you. The only person who bit. I always tell people there wouldn't be an eatmigos without a Maddie Sky.
Wonderful.
So Maddie Sky was like, hey, I'd never done anything like this before. So she's like, I'm like, do I come in? And she's like, no. I'm just we'll call you on the phone. We're going to write down, I'll ask you some questions. So we did that. I did that. That came out. And then I remember KSAT hits me up and they're like, hey, we want you on our show. We like what you're doing and like the hook and all that stuff. So they wanted me to Gilbert's restaurant over on the west side of town. And we shot there. So my food vlog was always like very Mexican taco centric, right?
Okay.
So whenever Favorite Delivery, which is owned by HEB, put out that they were looking for a chief taco officer, I was like, man, that's right up my alley, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this is amazing. And I remember thinking to myself though, like, I'm not presumptuous enough to think that like, oh, I'm going to get it. Like I honestly, I thought the opposite. They gave a deadline where you had to post a video. You had to post a video as to why you believe you were the best fit for this, right?
All right.
And they had criteria out there. And I remember I read it over and over and over, and it was the last day that you could submit. I mean, this thing had been open for like a month. And I was like,
I'm sure they got tons.
We did.
And were you trying to decide if you really wanted to do it, or you were trying to decide how should I do this?
I was trying to decide, maybe it was the day before, I was trying to decide if I think it was maybe the fear of failure, right? Like, man, I've been doing this, and if I don't get it, I didn't know, right? I was more scared of just not getting it.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go for it. So you had to do a video as to why. And I remember reading the criteria, and later on asking them like why I got it. This was probably the smartest thing I ever did. there were so many good videos out there. So let me say this, all the applicants, and that was also part of like the fear of actually applying, was because I was seeing these great videos come out daily. I'm like, man, I got to compete against that guy. That guy's amazing. And there was, man, some that were just amazing videos. But the one thing I noticed was, and this is just because I think people are so passionate about tacos, passionate about food, was it was pulling on their like nostalgic heartstrings so much that they were missing the point of the whole ask. Because it was a job interview. It was a fun one. But they asked, do you love Texas? Are you an adventurous eater? And there was like questions like that, right? Do you love to travel? I can remember what it. So what I did is I took off the website what they had written, and I wrote 5 bullet points, what I felt would answer all these questions. And I was like, okay, do you love Texas? Do you love tacos? Are you an adventurous eater? And I remember thinking to myself, how am I going to do this? Like, what video am I going to do that's going to separate myself from all these other people? And I remember, it was the day before, and I remember I thought all night long. And this last day, and I'm like, man, I got to, if I'm going to, deadline I think was 10 o'clock at night. I was like, if I'm going to apply, I have to shoot this today. And and I'm like, man, I've waited till the last day. And I was like, you know what? I have the most Texas thing in the world in San Antonio, the Alamo.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Alamo. I'm going to favor deliver myself some tacos. And when the guy gets there, I'm going to ask if he'll eat them, like if he'll let me film walking up.
Wonderful.
And no one had incorporated favor into any of their videos. And like I said, there was some
that's exactly
really amazing
Right.
people. But they were like, oh, I have, 5 taco tattoos, or I have this, or like I've been eating tacos my whole life, or whatever. And it's like, all that's very important. And I'm not discrediting that at all.
Yeah, of course.
But the thing is, it is a business, and it was an interview, and there was an ask. So like if you were going to an interview and they said, bring this, you'd bring it. But I think that was kind of looked over.
Yeah.
Right? So I looked at it more of like business than it being a fun opportunity. Maybe I took it too serious. I don't know. I I got the job. So
well, no, I mean, I think that taking all of that time to, think and to consider and to, and then finally getting to that point where I've just got to go do it.
Right.
I think that's all part of it, But yeah, that's very cool.
So favor delivery, I get there, and I'm like, hey man, look, I'm applying for the job for favor. Oh yeah, cool, man. I was like, so this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna be talking to the camera. I was like, they're gonna kick us out if they see us filming here. Yeah. I was like, so we don't have a lot of time for this.
Are you in the Alamo?
I'm right in front of it where they'll kick you out, or they'll kick you out if they see you're filming.
Right.
I have my tripod collapsed, and I have it in front of me, and I'm like, all right, this is what we're gonna do, man. I was like, I'm gonna pull up my tripod, I'm gonna put it here, I'm gonna hit record, I'm gonna talk. I was like, when I start lifting my hands and waving them, walk into the scene, pull out 2 tacos. I was like, hand me one, I'm gonna open it. I was like, you open it. I was like, we're gonna cheers, and we're both gonna take a bite. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. I was like, we really probably only have about 30 seconds.
And he had the favor hat and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Favor. Like it was,
yeah.
And I was like, we only got one shot before we get kicked out. I was like, so you have to understand, this is a one-take thing. And I remember, man, it was like, this is it. So I set it up, I do it, all this stuff, and I'm paranoid. I'm recording into the screen, but I'm looking at like if any of the security are coming in the screen too. So my eyes, if you look at it, like I'm like looking all over. Like, I'm like, is anyone? Are they coming? And the guy comes and he nails it, man. He's like, he comes and we do it and all that stuff. And I remember I go home, I edit it, and I submit it maybe like 6 o'clock or something. Like deadline was I think it's 10 o'clock. I remember I submitted it, and I was like, well, here we go. Let's see what happens. And I remember I submitted it, and I didn't hear anything for weeks, and I was like, I didn't get it. Not a big deal. And then I remember getting an email that said, saying like, hey, we want to do a Zoom call with you, right? So at that point, I do the Zoom call, and there's multiple people on. I don't know who they are. Now I know who it is. Like it's the marketing and comms and everybody, right?
Okay.
So I'm there, and I'm talking to them. And they're like, okay, so there's a couple other creative challenges that I had to do. And then I remember getting it to where it was like, hey, so we've narrowed it down, and this is the final creative challenge. Now, up to this point, my nerves, I'm like, man, I've made it this far. I couldn't even believe I'd made it this far at this point, right? I'm like, man, there's so many good. And I'm like, who am I competing with? How many people are in the last running or the last group or whatever? And I remember them saying, and it's so funny because every breakdown was so specific. The email said, do a video and describe a taco spot, a taqueria or whatever, the way you would if you were chief taco officer. And to me, that was the most scariest thing because there was no direction. Yeah. At this point, it was full creative control in all our courts. And I know that everybody else was probably feeling the same thing. It's like, there's like, you don't like say like, hey, I want it to be 30 seconds long. They're like, do it. Because I was asking, do you want it vertical? Do you want it? They're like, do it as if you would if you were the chief taco officer. And I'm like, man, this is way too much freedom. Like, I don't know.
Whatever taco spot you wanted.
Whatever you wanted to do. And I'm like, man, my nerves are just like, this is, because at this point I'm like, I'm a contender, I'm there. And I was like, if I don't get it, I was like, at least I made it to the end. At least I know I'm in the final running with everybody. And I'm like, there's like over 220, 240 or whatever applicants. And, if I've made it this far, I feel really good about myself. And I remember thinking, where am I going to go? Right? I'm like, so what taqueria in San Antonio screams San Antonio? And I was like, well, the birthplace of the puffy taco is San Antonio. So I'm going to Ray's. So I call up Lolly over there and I'm like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I was like, I don't know if this will ever be on social media. I was like, but I'd like to come and film. I was like, because I'm going to submit it for this or whatever. And she was so gracious, such a lovely person. That's Ray's daughter. And she's like, yeah, come film. She goes, you have access to whatever. She's like, there's a couple of things that we don't want you to show only because I think the proprietary, like how they actually, the things that they use. She's like, but like if you want to, like everything else, I'm like, perfect. So I go over there and literally they treat me as if like, man, I'm filming for Netflix or something. Yeah. Man, they roll out the red carpet for me. I'm forever grateful for it. And I remember I'm there, I do it, and I send it in.
So I have to ask. So did you feature the puffy taco?
I did. The
wow.
Yeah, because I was like, there's nothing more San Antonio.
I was going to say, it's so interesting because there's so many varieties that you could have chosen. The breakfast taco, the
really
crispy,
brilliant.
That's something totally different that probably most people wouldn't think of. Yeah.
Well, I was like, hey, I was like, today, I think in my video I started off, I was like, like I'm from San Antonio. Today I'm San Antonio. And San Antonio, when you come to San Antonio, there's only one taco that you have to try, and that is the puffy taco. Whether you get it from, I was like, but I'm going to go to the birthplace of it. So I go there and I talk about how it was, like the origins of it and those kinds of things. And everybody's like, oh man, this is like, it was a really good video. We wound up posting it, I think last year, we finally posted it. Because they were like,
I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, they were like, it was too good of a video not to post. So we actually, but I send it in and I'll never forget, I think weeks go by and I don't hear anything and I'm like, oh, I didn't get it. And I get an email. And I remember the email said like, hey, thank you for your submission. We've gone through everything. We'd love to have a meeting with you over Zoom. And they gave me a list of times. So I remember telling my wife, I'm like, I don't think I got it. She goes, why would they want to meet with you if you didn't get it? I was like, well, HEB is a professional company. Maybe they just want to say thank you so much. Maybe there's some opportunities in the future for you. I was like, but the thing that makes me feel that I didn't get it is because there were slots. I could pick these different time slots. I was like, I feel the winner doesn't have a time slot. That it was just like they're trying to go down the line and say thank you for whatever.
Right.
And I was like, well, I'm going to go last. I was like, so I don't know, it was like 11:15 or whatever. And I do it. And I remember getting on there. And it's probably like the longest, like 5 minutes of my life. They're not in the room. So they let me into the room and it's like, okay, what's going on? I'm like looking at my clock. I'm like, what's going on? When are y'all coming in or whatever? And I remember it was Catherine. She's the director of comms over there. And I remember she gets on there and I'm like, oh, it's just one person. I was like, I didn't know.
Now you know you didn't get it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I didn't get it. And then she's like, hey, Chris. I was like, she goes, so we really loved your video. She's like, she goes, and she kind of starts talking about it. I'm like, oh, she's drawing this out. She's trying to lower the boom. She doesn't want to
let you down easy.
And she goes, well, I have good news and I have some bad news. And I'm like, okay. So I was like, what is it? She goes, the bad news is, I want to unofficially offer you the spot because our lawyers haven't finished the contract.
That's the bad news.
That's the bad news. She goes, that we don't have a contract for you to sign today. She goes, but the good news is you're our choice.
Wow.
And
that's
I was
so
like,
cool.
And I was like, what is going on here? I could not believe it. Like, I remember thinking to myself, like, I remember how I felt the day that I applied. And I was like, man, there's so many people, right? And I literally I was so shocked that I got it. And then, people were like, well, of course, man, you'd been doing tacos. I was like, yeah, but the thing is, though, there's so many creative people out there. The competition was so good. And it was just really nice to know that I actually got the job and just to actually have it. And then the hardest part was they're like, okay, so we're not going to announce for a month. Or a month and a half. I mean, it was like so I know this for so long.
You can't say anything.
And you can't say it.
And I can't say anything.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
think that's what it went. I remember we talked a little bit about it in the past, and I think that's what struck me is that I didn't realize everything that went into it. I mean, there was competition that you had to create something amazing. You had to create several things. It was a lot that went into it. It wasn't just like, oh, here you go. You're the, it wasn't like that.
I think they announced it in March and it ran through like mid-April. And I found out like May, I think in May.
Yeah.
And then we didn't officially announce till June. And that's, I mean, like mid-June. I mean, so it was months. I mean, it was, it was for a while.
Wow.
That's so cool.
I know you think you don't deserve it or whatever, but you do really good videos.
Thank you.
And you can, you do good at describing things. When you were telling your story, it reminded me, Mike Rowe is the Dirty Jobs guy. Yeah. He got his start doing QVC. And in the interview, they handed him a number 2 pencil. They said, talk about this for 5 minutes. And he was able to do it. And so that's what you were able to do with that taco. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, it was like I said, it was super humbling. And still to this day, one of the most humbling things is it was only supposed to be for 3 months. It's a 3-month contract. Right. And I'm here, I've signed my 2nd year. So I'm like into over 2.5 years or whatever. So like I'm into it already like 2.5 years because and this is from this. It's been like the most successful marketing campaign.
Oh, wonderful!
That's amazing. That's so cool.
So cool.
And since then, because at one point I said, "Hey, I'd like to incorporate other food." They're like, "Well, we're going to promote you to chief tasting officer." And I remember they said it playing around, but they're like, "Hey, so we're going to add more to your plate. You're the chief tasting officer." And I was like, "That's a cool thing." So that's what they said.
Very cool.
So like it's like they added more to my plate.
I love it. That's amazing. Yeah.
Cool.
You truly do deserve it, and I think that's one of the things I think people relate to with your videos is that you're personable and people feel like they so it's really cool.
Great.
Exciting.
Well, thank you for telling us that story.
Yeah,
I appreciate
so
it. And
cool.
right now we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with Chris Flores. He is Eat Migos, and so glad he's here today. We'll be right back.
If you don't know me, my name is David Dyken. I'm with San Antonio PS. We are the local SkyTab sales and service office here in San Antonio, Texas. We come in with no money up front. We take a copy of the merchant's menu, we program it, we professionally install it, we train them how to use it, and provide unlimited support for both the hardware and the software. We're on site today at Max and Louie's, probably one of the most demanding hospitality environments here in San Antonio, and they're a great showcase for our technology. We have kitchen display systems, we have tableside ordering and payment devices, integrated online ordering for one of our favorite customers. So some of the features that you can enjoy with your POS system as a merchant is you'll have an included free loyalty program, a gift card program, free integration with third-party companies like DoorDash and Uber Eats, inventory control systems. We have a reservations module, lots of freebies that you're going to be paying the premium price for with other systems. There's no money up front. There's no risk to a merchant when they come on board. They pay for shipping and shipping only. They get to use the equipment for 30 days. If they don't like it at the end of the 30 days, you just ship it back. No obligation. At the end of 60 days, if they're happy with their system and they want to keep it, then we give them a $5,000 sign-on bonus just for coming on board. So it helps defray all costs for getting your new POS system. I'm David Dyken with San Antonio POS. Come visit us at sanantoniopos.com. Thanks.
And we are back, and today we have Chris Flores. He's also known as Eat Migos. He's also known as HEB's Chief Taco Officer.
Chief Tasting Officer.
Chief Tasting Officer. That's right. He got promoted. I forgot. You got the new stripes on here. Yeah.
So now you get to taste it. I mean, you were already. So you actually, I mean, outside of your Chief Tasting Officer position with Favor, I mean, you do social. Well, I guess content creation.
I do.
Yeah. So you have your own company and your own business where you do all of that. Mm-hmm.
I think one thing people don't realize is that I do video professionally. So like I did the mayor's campaign videos for last campaign. I do the sheriffs. I mean, I do so many things that people see on. I always tell people, if you watch TV, local TV, you've seen my work. Or There's been a couple of times my stuff's made it to the movie theater, which was really cool to see that on a movie theater. I'm like, man, I filmed that thing, you know, or whatever.
Well, and we're excited because for those of you who don't know, Chris actually works with us through Flavors of Texas as well. Yeah. So, we have, 90 plus restaurants that are, part of Flavors of Texas, and that's growing on a daily basis. And, Chris is one of our content creators that they can use. So anyway,
I love it.
Helps us. Yeah, no, it's really good. One thing that, as I got to know you better, I was so impressed with is your knowledge of food. And you said you weren't really a foodie at one point. You were kind of only going to what you knew, which is something I understand. But you've really researched food and you really know it.
I have.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about is something that drives me crazy. I love our San Antonio restaurant page. I started it, so I'm the number one fan, right? But I hate two things. People say that's not authentic, and Tex-Mex isn't really Mexican food.
And California Mexican food's better than Texas Mexican food.
Or vice versa.
Those are the three things that I get it too on my page all the time.
Yeah, I get it all the time. And it drives me nuts. So what do you think? What does authentic mean?
So I think that a lot of people who say that are ignorant and they just uneducated when it comes to food. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, I'm Hispanic, I'm Mexican American. And I think that a lot of times we believe what our grandma and our mom told us is gospel, right? Yeah. But unfortunately, they're not the ones who wrote Webster's dictionary or whatever. And the example I give is when people say things like, and I was this person once too, and there's like, oh, there's a huge difference between a burrito and a taco. They're so different. It's like, well, I think the way you grew up there was, but if you look at the definitions, they're literally the same. So unfortunately, the patriarchs of our family aren't the people who decide what the definitions really are. So in a culinary word.
It's so true. I mean, we talk to chefs all the time who, will say that they may have people who visit their restaurant, and if there's one little ingredient that's different than what their grandma put in, then it's just not authentic. It's not authentic.
But getting back to what you're saying, Alan, I think that what people, when they say authentic, so authentic's a really interesting word to use because at the end of the day, everything's authentic to where the location, their environment, and like where they're at, right? Yeah. And the whole reason why food has progressed and you have fusions and all that stuff is the availability of ingredients, right? And including with Mexican food. So like a lot of the things that you get in Mexico, you necessarily can't get here, and that's why the food changed. That's where cheese,
even in Mexico, you can get stuff along the coastline that you're not going to find in Monterey.
Absolutely. But I think when it comes to the border, people are like, "Oh, that's not authentic." It's like, well, it's not necessarily true. I mean, we were once Mexico, all right. So at the end of the day, and I think what people don't realize is, like a little history about all this is where everything came from. So. I'll just throw this snippet in because I think it's cool. So like even the word taco, right? So people are like, taco means this, taco means that. So like the actual origin of the word, and this is the Smithsonian. So I always tell people, you can argue with me all day long. You can go argue with the Smithsonian. I'm just saying what I've read and the researches I've done. So a long time ago, tacos weren't food. In the 1800s, so the miners, what they would do is they're mining and they would literally put gunpowder into paper, wrap it up and stick it between the rocks. And they called them tacos. Right, and that's and that's how they would explode things, and they called them tacos.
Wow, interesting.
So these are the Mexican migrant. I mean, they're miners, right? So as those miners start to migrate north because the railroad becomes prevalent, they go to two places: Los Angeles and San Antonio. So basically, as the railroad's being made, these people are moving up. So technically the food is now changing because they don't have these ingredients anymore. They're having to find other things, right? Okay. All right. So you're moving up. The first time tacos are mentioned in history in America is in 1905 here in San Antonio with the Chili Queens.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that. And I always tell people, man, San Antonio may not be the ones who made it first, but we're the ones who introduced it to America, right? So much so that because there was a railroad and people who would vacation on the railroad, they would say that, when you go to San Antonio, you got to go to see the Chili Queens, and that, eating their tacos was like biting the tongue of a dragon because they were so spicy.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And something very similar, like they had like tamale carts in Los Angeles, and they had tacos as well. Okay. But But like I always tell people, man, so San Antonio is really, San Antonio and Los Angeles, we're the ones who introduced tacos to America. I'm not going to say we did it first, but we're the first ones to mention it.
To make it big, yeah.
In American culture, right, 1905. So with that, as people moved up, those tacos changed. So, like I think corn and flour tortillas changed a lot. There's a lot more flour used here for Tex-Mex, whereas traditional corn, and whenever I say things, I always say traditional instead of authentic, because as I said, authentic is just whatever ingredients are around you, right? Because if that wasn't the case, then all food would always be the same.
Yeah.
And when people argue with me, especially people from Mexico, and they're like, well, no, this isn't authentic. And I'm like, well, let's look at the origins of like the al pastor and the trompo. So in Lebanon, there's religious.
That's where the trompo came from.
There's religious persecution. So those people, they move to Mexico. They move all over, right? And this goes for Chinese as well, the Chinese culture as well. But we'll just stick with the Lebanese. They move to Puebla. So Puebla is where they come. Mexican spices and Arab spices are very similar. Now, what they start doing is they start cooking their lamb, and because they're not making pita bread, they're putting it in tortillas. So that becomes tacos árabes, which are still prevalent there in Puebla, very much so. They're kind of hard to find here, but they're Arab tacos is what they call them. Then the availability of lamb, they were like, hey, we have a lot of pork, so why don't we do that? So they start. That's where al pastor came from.
Wow.
So when people argue with me, I'm like, so if that's the case, then we'd all still be eating shawarma or heroes and calling it Mexican food.
Yeah.
Right. Because it just progresses because it's what was available then, right?
Yeah.
Or where it was the availability of the ingredient.
Yeah, and then you have the mix of cultures as well. So you
Absolutely.
have your the Mexican influence and flavors and spices and all that kind of thing, and then you have your Texas and with the chilies and it's just the mix of those two cultures coming together to then create the Tex-Mex.
I mean, people always say like things like, oh, well, Taco Bell, he's the one who created the crunchy taco. It's like, well, that's 100% wrong. So like that was in the 60s, right? So he's the one who made it famous or made it popular, I should say, I think his name is Glenn Bell, the founder of it.
Yeah, it is Bell, yeah.
It's something Bell, right? But tacos dorados were, so back in the 40s, and I believe it's patented by some Mexican nationals. They were making taco shells for taco dorados and pre-making them, and they patented that. Glenn Bell just took that and made it widespread and mass-produced it or whatever.
Yeah.
But that didn't come from him. He didn't. People were like, "Oh, he invented the crunch." He didn't invent nothing. Like he just took something that was already there, right? And tacos dorados, I mean, that's like all over the place. When we eat those, all over Mexico or whatever, right? So it's just like a fried taco, right? It's crispy or whatever. It's just like hard, like. But yeah, so I think there's a big misconception when people talk about Mexican food. They talk about like the authenticity of it and like the traditions. And it's like, no, man, like, just because, I know so many people like who ate one thing in Mexico, they move here. Now they eat it something totally different, right? And it's like, yeah, this is authentic. But I think the one thing that people don't realize is like, well, this is an authentic Mexican food. It's like, well, we are in America. This isn't Mexico. So technically, you're right. It's not authentic. Now it's a version. It's a fusion, right? It's a fusion of Mexican food. But at the end of the day, it's like, whenever you go and you eat pizza, like in New York or Chicago or whatever, pizza was here before it was in Italy. You know what I mean? It was like made here. Pastas are different, in Italy than they are here. And it's just funny to me how people are so hard when it comes to Mexican food. And it's like you really shouldn't be. You should just enjoy it. Or go find a traditional place that serves traditional Mexican food. And shut up. To be honest with you, exactly. Like at the end of the day. I mean,
because to me, it bothers me not only that they say it's not authentic, but the fact that they just disrespect it. They say it's trash food, and it's not.
Well, it's interesting though because it's not trash food, but. Mexican cuisine is lighter, whereas your Tex-Mex, you have your cheeses and you have your melted, burritos and things like that. So it's a different.
The reason they say that is because this. So historically, like traditional Mexican food is made from fresh ingredients.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tex-Mex a lot canned tomatoes and like stuff that isn't as fresh, right?
Right.
And I think that's where people are like, oh, well, that's not authentic because it wasn't grown in the backyard or it was grown somewhere. Those tomatoes were grown somewhere. It's not like they're, synthetic or whatever. Just, yeah, they're not like cloned tomatoes or whatever. It's someone grew them somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know. It just
There's a lot of disrespectful.
It shouldn't be disrespect. Yeah, that's it. They should be proud.
Yeah, but the thing is, man, I think that a lot of that comes from, man, Mexican people are just really hard on each other on a lot of different things, and food is one of them, right? I think culturally, every race is hard on their own race when it comes to things like this, like food. It's just
that's so eye-opening. I think you might be right there.
Yeah. So, but it just in the San Antonio, pickle jar 1, 2, 3 will say whatever he wants when his picture's not on there, but he's not gonna say that to your face or to a chef or anything like that.
Whatever, definitely. Right? They're a lot braver. Yeah.
There's so much bravery to say things online.
Wow.
But at the end of the day, I guarantee you see those guys eating at Eddie's Taco House, Teco Molino, and all these. Like, I guarantee you, they're going there. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was doing a little bit of reading on it, and there is so in reference to the authenticity of Tex-Mex, and there's a chef or in a cookbook author. Her name is, and her name keeps coming up. Her name is Diana Kennedy. And she, and she writes cookbooks on Mexican cuisine. And in 1990, she came out with a cookbook talking about Tex-Mex and why Tex-Mex is an authentic cuisine. And that was the first time that it was actually starting the acceptance of, this is a cuisine. But before that, it was not considered.
Yeah.
I mean, look at like Tejano music, same thing. It's not traditional Mexican music, but it's like Tex-Mex music. It's and I think that, in saying that, and I always say this, and I don't know, people can hate me for saying this. I tell people that, in my opinion, to me, so Tex-Mex to me is Mexican food, right? It all came from that culture, right? But like I always tell people, the true Tex-Mex fusion to me is the Mexican food into barbecue. And I tell people 15 years ago, when you walked into a barbecue place, there was no tacos on the menu.
Yeah.
Now, if you walk into a barbecue place, there's not tacos. You're like, man, where are the tacos at?
Right,
Where are the tortillas at or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
So if you look at it, it happened before our eyes.
true.
And people don't realize that. It was the true fusion of Tex-Mex is actually Mexican food and barbecue. And a lot of people don't realize that because there's so many people now, like burnt beans.
Like brisket. And,
2M, Valentina's. Like they're embracing more of the Mexican culture and like the way that like we would
even
eat.
the beans too.
All of that.
It's so interesting you say that because I know some Mediterranean restaurants that have added tacos onto their menu because so that people would, because they want tacos on the menu, and so and it's interesting that you were saying that Mediterranean is actually a
very similar. I mean, like it's a variation and. I always tell people like Bulgogi Boys, they were a food truck, man, Korean Bulgogi tacos. I see so many, Chef Leo over at Sticks and Stones.
Yeah.
And all, I think it's a beautiful thing. I always tell people, I call San Antonio the taco capital of the world. And people are like, well, it's not, it's Mexico City. I'm like, okay, we'll go there and get a bean and cheese taco, a Tex-Mex taco. You're not going to find it. So where are you in the world are you going to find all tacos?
All of them right here.
It's going to be here in Houston, like this area, right?
Yeah.
And I always tell people, I like to say San Antonio is the taco capital of the world, but at the end of the day, I mean, Houston also, they have a lot of fusion. You got Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, Mexican fusion, Cuban, Mexican fusion. I just say they want Paladar, the Cuban Mexican fusion, beautiful place. But like I'm not going to say you can't survive here because McDonald's survives here. They don't have tacos in the menu. They have a wrap.
Yeah.
But I would say that I think when people come here into San Antonio, they see the culture. It's almost to the point where they're like, as to your point, Susie, they have to add tacos because that's the vehicle people are used to getting like their food. And,
I mean, you wonder how far back does a cuisine have to go before it's considered? Because if you think about it, especially for us San Antonians, I mean, Tex-Mex has been a staple that we grew up on for generations. And so how far back does it have to go before it finally gets,
the first technically the first Tex-Mex restaurant was in Dallas. I used to know the name of it and I've covered them before. I just don't know it. Phoenix. El Phoenix. They're the first. They're the first that was labeled Tex-Mex, and they were the ones who was the fusion.
Really?
Yeah. And that's because of like we were talking about the miners and all that stuff went through there. So that was a hub, man.
When did Teca Molina here in San Antonio?
1929 or 39.
So you think that the Phoenix was before that?
Oh yeah. You're talking like turn of the century.
Oh, wow. And they're still around?
They're still around, yeah.
We need to go.
Yeah,
let's all go.
Yeah. I've gone. Yeah, it's a great place. It's it's super nostalgic. So where they're at in Dallas is a place where whenever people started migrating to Texas from Mexico, they called that Little Mexico.
Oh wow!
In Dallas. So if you can Google it, it's called Little Mexico. That's where all the tents were, all the tent cities where everyone, and they were the first to open up a restaurant and start pushing out food. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, the Phoenix.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, it's on the list.
And speaking of lists, now I get to check off on the list that I had Chris Flores on the podcast to talk about this because I've wanted to do it for so long.
He has. He really has.
And so glad we finally got you in here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad that our schedules finally lined up.
Yeah. Well, listen, you are a fantastic guest. We'd like to have you back again soon.
Please.
Yeah, we won't wait, until get episode number 100.
which we're almost there.
We're almost there. Well, probably this one could be it.
Could be.
So anyway, well, thank you for being here. We appreciate it so much. Learned a lot.
Thank you.
And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, thank you for all y'all do as well. I mean, you guys are out there doing it as well. I mean, all these restaurants, they need help. And, we're doing our best to make sure they're keeping their doors open. And I know we all make a big impact, in one way or another.
Yeah.
One of the things that restaurants always ask me, they're like, hey, so if you come here, what can you guarantee? I was like, well, I can guarantee I'm going to post. But the one thing I think I never tell them this was but the one thing I can guarantee is that other people who do what I do, content create, foodies, it'll draw them in too. They're going to see, I'm like, well, I want to try that as well,
exactly.
right? I was like, so whereas, our posts may not do as good as you would like it to, it breeds other posts that are going to do, that are going to do good or whatever,
Excellent.
right?
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, so thank you guys for what you're doing as well. You guys have always been a big, I remember the first time Alan introduced me and he was like, this is Chris Flores. He does Eat Migo. I remember in the San Antonio restaurant group reading that. And you kind of introduced me to everybody. That was a long time ago, I think 2018-ish or something. That was a long time ago, but I remember that. So yeah, thank you for that. We've always been like friends and
Absolutely. All right. Well, Susie, we will be back again next week.
We will.
And maybe Chris will still be here. Who knows?
That would be cool. Wait, let's do it.
All right. Well, listen, guys, thank you for listening today. And we ask you to share this with your friends. Let everyone know about the more you know, the better it tastes.
Absolutely. And get out there and support the restaurants. I mean, seriously, coming together as a community and supporting the amazing restaurants that we all talk about. Follow Chris at Eat Migos again on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook.
Wherever.
Wherever. All of those different places. He has so much going on. And his videos are fantastic. So.
Yep. All right. Well, until next week, we'll see you again.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye,
Thanks, Chris.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.